Welcome to Traveling Rocks. Today I am exploring Denmark's Parliament, and just I am exploring an exit outside. Entrance gate, they are providing you such kind of sticker. You can book the appointment for the Parliament tour, and for the entrance gate they are providing you the sticker. You carry the sticker and explore the Parliament. And one more interesting, this Parliament tour is absolutely free, but just be carefully book the appointment and then came here on time. Thank you. ये इधर कुछ है? हाँ? ये नेक्स्ट टेबल है? हाँ। दिन भर बड़बड़ीच करता रहे। So here is a parliament. ये क्या हो?
Right side of the big staircase.
ये?
ये तो टावर का entrance है.
वो उसको पूछ लेता हूँ. रुको यार, मैं उसको पूछ लेता. तेरा नामकरण बदल दिया उन्होंने. नहीं यहाँ लव है.
So today it seems like it's very quiet. Yesterday we had a large conference. There was also Zoom conferences as well, besides just ordinary parliamentary work. The present Christiansborg Palace is actually the third version of the castle to be located on this site. The first two versions were both built with absolute monarchs of Denmark, the kings and queens. The first one burned down in 1794, the second one in 1884. And when the task came to build the third one, we had actually received our first democratic constitution. We received it in 1849. The architect in charge of the project was Christiansborg here. Of course, the task of building a palace that can house the parliament is quite different from a palace for kings and queens. Originally, it was intended for the king to have an apartment here, but he decided not to in the end. But we still have an interesting division of power in the building. So on this side and towards the main square, we have the legislative parliament. On the other side, we have the Queen's reception area and the Prime Minister's office. That's the executive. And in the courtyard towards the city, we have the High Supreme Court. Of course, that's the legislative. We are all in the same building, but we have each our own section. And there are different security checkpoints when you pass from one section to another, so you cannot just move freely from one section to another. And of course that was the task that Folketinget had to solve, how to make room for all three elements of all three branches of power. He did it quite well, we think. It seems to work, but it is an unusual arrangement. We don't see it in many other places in the world. This section here, we have the main entrance down to the right. That is where the members of parliament enter. There are 179 members, but there are also those who work with political parties. It's about 650, so it's growing every year. More and more people coming in, everything from strategic work to communications to helpers of various kinds. They take up more and more space, so we are in constant need of space, particularly office space. There are also 450 who works for the house, like me, and make sure everything goes as it's supposed to, servicing the members, etc. So we have fairly large staff. We also have 200 members of the press. This is also an unusual arrangement, but we actually have press in-house. So the large TV stations and newspapers have their offices here. Underneath the chamber, there are editing rooms of the two largest TV stations. They can move freely inside and make interviews when they feel like it, as long as the members agree. It seems to work quite well. I mean, those members of the press get privileged access to the members of parliament, but the members of parliament also get a channel to get some of their news and ideas out to the public. So there's a quid pro quo in the arrangement. So it is like a small village. All in all, there are about 1,400 people working here. We have restaurants, 4 of them. We have a kiosk just here. We have exercise rooms. We have masseurs. We have a stylist and a hairdresser. We have a police station. We have postal servers. We have travel agencies. All kinds of things that makes it easier for the members of parliament to perform their work. The main area that connects everything else is actually just upstairs, and that will be our next stop. But before we get to the lobby hall, we shall see the upper chamber. The upper chamber does not function as an upper chamber anymore, but the original constitution gave us a bicameral system with a lower upper chamber like we find in the UK. But in 1953 we abolished the upper chamber, so today it's a unicameral system with Folketinget as the only chamber. But we will start in the upper chamber, going back in time a little bit. So we'll take the stairs here, we call them the victory stairs, that's where you go when you won the election.
इनके भी पहले वो लोकसभा राज्यसभा जैसे थे, अब सब डिसमिस कर दिया, एक ही चला दिया.
Yes, yeah. कौन से नीचे लेकिन आराम से.
So what you see when you look out of the window is actually the oldest part of the castle, dates back to the 1730s. It's from the first version of Christiansborg Palace. It's the royal stables. Originally they would have the carriages on the right hand side and the horses on the left. On the left hand side we still have stables, but there are not 300 horses, there are 13. Just enough for the Queen's carriage. There's plenty of room when the house guards come with the cavalries, when they come in for jubilees, etc. We also have the Royal Court Theatre located there, one of the most beautiful theatres in Copenhagen. Unfortunately, it's under restoration at the moment, but it looks more or less like you're going back to the 1730s, so it's quite beautiful. On the right-hand side, we have an indoor riding house, sort of a Viennese-style riding house, where you can enjoy the performance of the skills of the horse riders. And that is about as far as you can get in the castle. The room here used to be the upper chamber. The bicameral system functioned that legislation had to pass through both chambers before it could be passed in Parliament. And the upper chamber was very much the conservative force, holding back legislation, whereas the lower chamber was the reform-friendly people sitting there. You could say it was a king's men who sat in this room. And the king often attended meetings. He would sit above the clock. Today there's not much space, and it's because it's been taken over by one of the political parties. They have their office space there. It's actually the Socialist Party. So the Socialists have taken the king's position. Opposite the king's position, we'd have the press, where you see the brass lamps. Today it functions as a place for interpreters when we have international meetings in the room, because we use this room as sort of a multifunction room today. So we have committee rooms, we have hearings, press releases, we have parties, etc. So it works for all purposes. Here it would be in a hearing that we are sitting, so there's a panel and then people coming in and asking questions. But we can set it up in various formations. The tables and chairs here can be placed as according to needs. The paintings you see in here are by a Danish artist called Erik A. Fransen, and it's basically a look into a normal Danish person's apartment or living room. This is from his kitchen window, from his apartment in Nørrebro, an old working class area of Copenhagen. And it's a little reminder to the members of parliament that they represent ordinary people. The drawings you see up on top is also by him, and they are made afterwards, but from the same motif. And the reason he didn't add color there was just so he didn't want to force the ceiling down. He wanted to give the grandeur of the room some space, in a sense. But it's one of the most beautiful rooms, certainly the lightest room, with the beautiful light coming in from the equestrian riding grounds outside. Next up will be the Prime Minister's portraits just outside, so let's go and have a look.
ये देखा क्या? वो साला गिरा तो आदमी कुछ अंदर चल गया.
Now, just outside the upper chamber, we have our portrait gallery of former prime ministers. The idea here is that when you step down as prime minister, you will be contacted by the art committee, and they will ask you whether you intend to run for office again. If you say yes, it will stop there, you will just continue your work. But if you say no and you are finished with politics, then the process of having a portrait artist chosen and the portrait painted will begin. It's very much a process after the Second World War between the Prime Minister and the artist, so together they will find the type of portrait they want. Prior to the Second World War, we had older portraits where it's more like civil servant pictures. They were just made, there was not a lot of artistic decisions on the Prime Minister's part. It was just something you had to have made when you were done. But afterwards, they become more individual. The Prime Minister wanted to put their own touch to the painting, to show their personality, maybe some aspects of their political life. Some of them became very individualistic. The gentleman here, who became a social democrat, he was bipolar, so he had these mood swings, and he wanted that to be part of the painting. The gentleman over here was like our John F. Kennedy, the rock star of Danish politics, also a social democrat. He was married to a movie star and everything, but when he finished with his political life, he just left it all behind, moved up to a summer house area in northern Jutland and started painting himself. So this is him as a normal, ordinary Danish citizen.
This is a self-portrait?
No, that was actually painted by a colleague up there, but not one who was known for portrait painting. And the painting over there with a gentleman with a tie and grey hair and so very dominant. Schlüter, he was not a tall man, he was 163, 64 centimeters, and yeah, not the tallest of politicians, but here it's the most dominating portrait in the room. So it's a real powerful portrait. So you can choose your angle on it. Now, prime ministers are elected for 4 years. But of course you can call for an election prior to that if you find it convenient. In Denmark we have typically minority governments, although the present one is actually a majority government. But the typical thing is a minority government consisting of several parties. And the rule is that you can have a minority government as long as you don't have a majority against it. So typically it's a minority government with supporting parties. Our present government is a little unusual in the sense that it is a majority government. It consists of 3 parties, but they represent the left wing, the right wing, and the center. And it's happened once before, but last time it only lasted for a month. Yeah. So it's a little uphill, but it seems to be going okay. But they have the advantage of being able to pass legislation on their own. They don't actually need support from the lobby hall here is actually the sort of central room in the castle, at least in this side of the castle. From here you can get to everywhere. You can get to the chambers, you can get to the committee rooms, you can get to the group rooms where the strategies are made, and you can get to the parties' rooms where their sort of administrative sections are located. So this is the center of everything, and this is where you will find the press typically. They will do interviews in front of the main chambers, and during the election they had their large screens out where you can see the results coming in from various regions of Turkey. So this is very much sort of the heart of Parliament. Our next stop will be down by the Constitution, and on the way you can admire this beautiful floral frieze that you see all the way around. It's 268 meters long. It was made for the opening of Parliament in 1918, and it was made by one man, Christiansborg.
नोटिया का फोन 3315
ग्रंथ है शायद
ये भागवत गीता है
Right, so we get that. So this area here is actually called the middle of the realm. And here you're allowed to sit down if you like.
oh
Try a chair. Quite comfortable. So you sit down if you prefer.
बैठो रे
Right, so outside it says some say that's the conversation room. It was originally intended to be a place where the upper and lower chamber could meet and sort of informally solve some of their problems over a cup of coffee, beer, something like this. But it soon became the representation room of the speaker. So when there are important visitors, Denmark will be greeted by the Queen first, then they will come here if there's a political element to their visit. So we have had heads of state, kings and queens, etc. coming here. Nelson Mandela, Dalai Lama, Arafat, but also the last royal visitor was the King of Belgium. We had Clinton when he was president. Obama never managed to get here during the time he was president, but he visited shortly afterwards. But then, of course, he's not greeted in here. They have a little something to eat first, the tables, and then there's an official state photograph taken afterwards, and it's always taken in the sofa there. You're welcome. For a long time, the room looked a little bit different. There was a different color carpet. It was blue. There was a different color on the walls. And there was paintings of former Conseil presidents, the title of Prime Minister before it was called Prime Minister. The problem was that when you have dinner with someone you don't know too well, and you don't really have something to talk about, it's nice to have a little help from what you see on the walls. And nobody knew these people. They were lost in history. So when we restored the room to its original design, the summer before last, we brought in constitutional paintings instead. The last painting, of course, was always here. But we got the small one here. This is the Constitutional Assembly, 1849. Could say it's a lot of old men. It's a real ensemble picture. So everybody who was any guest at the time had to be on this painting, even though they may not have been at the actual meeting. But there's a lot of old men. There are some officers and some members of the clergy. This fact changed a little bit when we get to 1915. It's still old men, but there's no officers and there's no members of the clergy, and only the people who are actually present at the meeting are in the painting. But ironically, this is when women got the vote and also the working classes, and they are not actually in the picture. Although, according to the artist, the door in the background, that is the women knocking, and 3 years later the first women were voted into parliament in 1918. And the gentleman on the left with the big red beard and round glasses, his name is Stalin. He's a social democrat, and his electorate, they are standing outside, of course, that's the working classes. And when they got into parliament in 1918, they voted him into the prime minister's office, and he is still the longest sitting prime minister with 15 years and 9 months. So in Denmark, there's no actual limitation. You can be re-elected as many times as you want, as long as there is a popular vote. Now, 1953, 12 most important men, there were actually 14 right in the constitutional draft, but the 12 most important men, but still only men, they were the ones, actually the story goes that it was, the artist did not want to do an ensemble picture, so he just wanted a small picture with a very sort of dynamic look. He was very fond of the front cover of Time magazine that was always painted in the early years, and sort of very dynamic pictures. So he asked one from the left wing and one from the right wing who were the most important, and they could come up with 12 men. Mm-hmm. However, today we are actually 44% women in parliament. We have a female prime minister, many of the party leaders are women, and later this year we will have a large painting, almost as large as this one, here with the women who have played a part in Danish politics from the beginning till today. We're just waiting for the artist. She's sitting up in the library studying old portraits, finishing her work. Until then, we have two paintings. Line Lublau, she was the founder of the first women's liberation movement in Denmark. And the gentlemen on the right, they are French and English ambassadors who were trying to decide the borderline between Denmark and Germany after the First World War. But they're just placeholders. Next up will be the main entrance of the chamber.
हाँ अच्छा तो लगा ये तो देखना बैठने को साला इलेक्शन करने पड़ता है.
You'll also see a few in the chamber itself. But if you look around, you can see the mixture of styles. It's a little confusing. Right, we have now come to the upper end. The main entrance for the chamber is there. It's only members who enter through there. We have sort of a strict rule that only members are allowed on the floor. The only other people who get on the floor are a little group of my colleagues who make sure there are papers and water, etc. And those who actually run the meetings from the juridical aspects of it. But otherwise it's only members. If you work for one of the ministers, you will go through the doors on the right there, and the rest of us will see it from upstairs. Including the Queen, actually. Outside the chamber, we have one of the old committee boards. The thing is that in Denmark, legislation will go through 3 readings in the chamber. The first reading, legislation will be presented, and the parties will say what they think of it. Then it will go into the committees, and there are a committee for each ministry, plus some ad hoc committees. And their job is then to examine the proposal. They will ask all the critical questions, they will call in experts, and then come with amendments. And then the amendments will be taken down for the second reading and voted on. And if it's voting yes, they will go into the committee again, and the bill will be finalized, and it will be presented for the third reading, where they will vote whether it should be law in Denmark or not. So that's the general process. But the committees also have another function. They are like the watchdogs of Parliament in relation to government. So they can call in the ministers if they don't perform as the law intends. So they have a very important function there as well. And you can see we still use the analog version, although they do get push messages on their phones. Many of them actually like the analog version. And on these, you can still see Teams many places, and that was part of the COVID-19 affair, because prior to that, we'd never had the option of following the meetings from home. But after the COVID-19, this is now an option for most of the committees. There are a few where you have to be present, but most of them you can actually be following them from home. The artist who did this beautiful floral frieze, he also knew that committees can also be used to stall legislation a little bit. It can be slow work, and he added a snake, or a slough, which just goes through the floral frieze there, and the spider spinning its web. And then on his old days, he got back and he added this pickle jar. And you know, when you pickle things, you put it in the cupboard, forget everything about it. Committees can be used for that as well. Anyway, we shall go upstairs. You will see some portraits of former speakers, and the speaker in Denmark is the second highest ranked person. So the Queen is first, and the speaker, and then the Prime Minister. And that's also why they will visit the Queen first, then the speaker afterwards. But we won't stop here. In Denmark, the speaker is elected among the oldest members, and it's typically the five largest party who decides who the speaker is. And the party who gets the speaker, the other four parties will get the assistant speakers. So they take turns sitting on the speaker's chair, directing the meetings. Let's go upstairs.
रेस्टोरेंट अच्छा यही शायद
ये है
पार्लियामेंट
वो स्पीकर है
सीखना पड़ता अपने डैनिश अरे बाप
We don't have this, so they're not very political. The Supreme Court is not selected from political reasons. They are Right, so now we've come into the most important room in Parliament, the chamber itself. We are in the Queen's Gallery. The royal family sits here in the middle. They only visit us once a year for the opening of Parliament, first Tuesday in October. They're not used all that often. But when they are here, they have former members of Parliament on the right-hand side and foreign ambassadors. And on the ground, underneath the balcony, that's those who work in the ministries who can advise or consult the minister. They're not allowed to come into the room, but the minister, of course, is. It runs up, over, down, over, so you can run it all day. It runs with a certain speed, so there's about 15 seconds between each carriage. And for a beginner, it seems quite fast. Yeah. So new members, they have to sort of take a hold and find their feet before they go in, and they rush in and make sure they don't hit their head on the ceiling. And the same when you get off, you don't want to fall flat on your nose. I mean, there's a lot of group coming in with cameras filming, and it's very embarrassing when you just started in Parliament line. So they're a little careful.
You have time to practice?
Yeah, exactly. So it takes a little time, but when you get it, it's very convenient. Typical lifts, you press the button, but there could be 5 other people who press the button before you, so you don't know when it arrives.
ये स्पेस बड़ा सही लगा साला मुझे, कितना शांत, लाइट भी वहाँ पे छोटा सा है। वो ऐसा ही था लेकिन वो बहुत बड़ा है।
वो बहुत बड़ा है था, उनका कितना तामझाम था।
बट ऐसा ही था वो, इधर से उधर से। वो 1 किलोमीटर भर की बिल्डिंग थी।
बाहर तक छोड़ दिया तो बोला।
हाँ हाँ, जैसे आए वैसे ही जाएंगे ना। अपन घुसे थे यहाँ से।
Free tour, politics, history, art. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Have a good day.
Yeah, same to you. Yes. Now bye bye. बहुत ही हल्का है क्या? Oh, it's beautiful.